Hey everyone, Nightharo here, and today I've got a quick guide for you for veteran Rockgrove. I do have a more in-depth guide on the channel, and I'll link it down below. Alright, so with that, let's go ahead and begin. First thing I would note that there are a couple of add-ons that can be very helpful for mechanics in this trial. The first one is Xalvakka's Rockgrove Helper, and that really works well with Odie's support icons. And then the last that I would definitely recommend is Hodor's Reflexes. I would note that I am only using Hodor Reflexes and a couple of other buff add-ons during the video today, so you won't actually see the mechanics popping up on the screen like you would with Odie support icons and Xalvakka's Rockgrove Helper. That's just a personal preference of mine. I don't like using mechanics add-ons. So let's talk about how to deal with the add pulls in this trial. Basically, throughout the entire trial, the main issue you'll have is with the Soul Weavers. And the easiest way to deal with pretty much all of the add pulls is to take the Soul Weaver really far out of group. Have the off tank take it really far out of group. Have everybody else DPS down everything else with the tank, 2 group healers, and all the DPS together. DPS down those adds and then move over and kill the Soul Weavers separate. Now there is one add pull where you'll have 2 Soul Weavers, still basically do the same thing where you pull that one Soul Weaver out and then have the group DPS down the other Soul Weaver as quickly as possible, and then kill the rest of the adds, and then go kill the last Soul Weaver after that. The first adds you run into here are these Death Hoppers. Now the Death Hoppers, their main thing is that they do an attack that will hit 3 different targets. If you're a tank and you taunt one of them, they will hit you with one of those attacks, but they will still hit 2 other people in group. So the main way to deal with them is to chain them in group and have them AoE down. The second add that you need to worry about is the Reaver. Now the Reaver has 2 mechanics that you need to be concerned about. The first one is that their light attacks will one-shot a tank or nearly one-shot a tank if you've got kind of higher health. So you need to make sure you're holding block whenever you're tanking them. And then if you have to move them from point A to point B, you want to make sure that you're dodge rolling, moving very quickly, etc., so that you don't get one-shotted from behind. The other mechanic that they will do is called Earthquake, and you'll see it here. They stomp and create an AoE on the ground. When this happens, you just need to move out of it. Ideally, you move towards the DPS so that the add will stay inside of their ground dots, but in a pinch, any direction will do. Now, the next add that we have here is the Bloodseeker. Bloodseekers will start one-shotting DPS with their light attacks, so you do need to be careful with that. Other than that, hold taunt on them, interrupt them whenever they start to channel, and then you'll have to range stack them from time to time. The fourth add here is the really tricky one, and that is the Soul Weaver. Soul Weavers have an ability called Astral Shield, which creates a shield around them and all enemies within 28 meters. This shield will scale based on the health of the target, so elite adds will have a larger shield. Now, once the shield is DPS down, it will break. Once the shield breaks, the last bit of its health is destroyed, it will shoot out and do damage to everybody within 20 meters. And each shield does this separately. So generally the rule of thumb is that if you have 3 or more shields up at the same time that are going to break near each other, you want to go ahead and dodge roll. If you have 2 or less, you can just hold block. The idea being that if you have 3 or more, the amount of damage, it'll still one-shot you even through your block. The best way to deal with this is to have someone who's experienced, to keep an eye on that shield when it's going to break, and go ahead and help out the group and call out block or dodge so that people can act appropriately and not get one-shot by that. The other mechanic they will cause AoEs to spawn on 3 different people in the group. All you have to do is move out, hold block, and it's not a big deal, just so that you're not stacking it in group. It doesn't do a ton of damage. The main thing you need to worry about is the astral shields. All right, on to the first boss. So the main tank here just needs to taunt the boss, turn him around, and then hold block. You don't really need to do too much else. The main mechanic that he will do for you is that he'll raise his hands over his head and he'll go to smash the ground. And whenever he does that, it'll create an AoE on the ground. You'll see it start to fill up and then it goes off. You don't want to be standing inside that when it goes off. It will one-shot you if you're not blocking, and it'll chunk you down to like 20% health if you are. Other than that, try to keep him in between the 2 pools and turn around facing the door at all times. And then when he turns and charges, don't chase after him. Just wait for him to come back to you, because sometimes he'll do that ground AoE while he's walking back. And if you're out of position, it could end up someplace on the DPS or just some other place that's inconvenient. So again, just stay by the exit door here. Now for the kite healer, you're going to stand off to the left over here, and your job is to be as far away from the boss as possible, but still within 28 meters. So how you can tell if you're still within 28 meters is that your ranged attacks will still be able to hit the boss. So just make sure that you can still hit him with your light attacks, and that will let you know that you're in range. After that, just make sure you're the furthest person away. And the reason for that is you're trying to kite the charges. So he charges the person who's the furthest away, but 28 meters without going over. So he'll turn, he'll get in a 3-point stance, and then he'll take off charging for you. Now, once he's taken off charging, he will not change direction, so you can just dodge roll or run out of the way. Both will work if you're fast enough. However, dodge rolling is certainly safe, and you can even dodge roll through him, and you will not get ran over. Now, as far as the DPS and group healer, you're just going to run up and DPS the boss directly from behind. You kind of want to cheat over to the right, to the DPS's right a little bit, because when the charges happen, you don't really want to have to move. And if you just kind of cheat over to the right, you'll be in a good spot and you won't have to move whenever he does go to charge. Now, the other mechanics that happen at 90, 75, 50, and 25% health on the main boss, he will summon in an ad. And he'll typically say something like burn you away and or something about fire. And you'll see that there'll be some meteors that fall from the sky, and then eventually there'll be a large meteor, which is actually where the ad is going to spawn in. He'll spawn in at the center of that large AoE. The off tank just wants to taunt him immediately and then go ahead and move him to position here. When all these meteors are falling, it's best to just go ahead and step out of them and avoid that damage. You can also hold block and block cast through most of them. As long as you're getting heals, it shouldn't be too big of a deal. The main thing that happens in this fight is there's a lot of avoidable damage, and if you choose to stand in some of it and then accidentally get hit by others, it could do enough damage to kill you or some of the DPS in the group. So my recommendation is just to avoid all the damage you can, and that way you don't have as many seemingly random deaths happening in group. Now the tank is going to stack the ad at the quote-unquote corner of this pool. I know it's a circular pool. We're going to pretend like it's a square, and so you just want to put them right on the inside corner. That would be the most towards the center of the arena here. And then the DPS, all you need to do as a DPS is simply turn around and DPS the ad. You don't need to move too much. You don't need to get out towards the middle of the arena. Just turn around, put your back towards the main boss, and DPS down the ad. The group healer will have to kind of turn around a little bit so that they can combat prayer towards the off tank, but it shouldn't be too big of a deal. As a group healer, I do recommend keeping quite a few ground hots down, just because again, there is quite a bit of passive damage that happens during this fight, and that'll keep people from dying. Now, the last mechanic that you have to worry about is poisons, and he'll usually say something like spit melt you away, and whenever he does that, 2 people in the group become poisoned. Now, it's pretty easy to tell that you're poisoned because the edges of your screen will turn green, and you'll kind of get this cloudy looking thing going on, very much like Cloud Rest if you've ever experienced the voltaic overloads, but instead of being like a purple glowy thing, it's green. Now, the best way to handle this is that when you find out that you're cursed, go ahead and call which pool you're going to, so you can say left or right. And the pools you want to use are the 2 that are beside the exit door. You don't want to use either of the ones near the entrance. And the main reason for that is that you don't want Oaks to charge through group because you're using one of the back pools and you ended up being the person furthest from him instead of the kite healer, because that can kill quite a few people. The other reason you don't want to use those pools is because it will muddy the waters, and then frogs will spawn from those pools. And if they're in the back, it'll be hard for the tanks to chain them in. Now, if 2 people call the left pool, for example, then whoever called it second just needs to change directions and go to the right. You don't need to discuss it or anything else. If 2 people say left, whoever the second person said it was actually goes to the right, and vice versa. So just pick a pool, whichever one you're going to, call it out in comms quickly. And if you're the first person, then you just go ahead and head that way. If you're the second, you just need to change directions and head to the other pool. And that's pretty much it for this boss. I will say, as a off tank, you do need to worry about when he heavy attacks, that causes meteors to spawn, and they'll spawn 1 on you and then several more on people, random people in the group in the DPS stack. So when that happens, you just want to move out of those. You can hold block through them and they won't stun you and knock you down. However, again, if you can avoid any damage in here because you might get hit by multiple AoEs that do a little bit of damage, they can stack up and you can end up dying kind of quote unquote randomly if you let that happen. Now, the ad will turn around periodically and will target someone with something called Cinder Cleave, and you'll see it's a conal attack. Whenever that happens, all you need to do is stand there and hold block. You can try to dodge roll the attack itself, and that's not a bad idea. Just make sure you dodge roll forward or backwards and not to the side. The reason for that is it puts a dot on you, and you just don't want it to be in the group. And so the easiest way to do that is for you to stay inside the cone and everybody else to move out. The last thing I will say, if you're new to this fight, I do recommend that you go ahead and DPS down the last ad that spawns at 25%, unless the boss is already pretty low on health. I've just seen a lot of groups wipe whenever they're new to this trial because they choose to instead just focus down the boss, and then something goes wrong, and with the ad up, it's just a lot harder to recover. But that's just my 2 cents. All right, so moving on. Now, before the second boss, there is this one ad pull here that is one of the harder ad pulls in the game right now. For this ad pull, what it's best to do is to have the off tank taunt the Soul Weaver and the Barbarian, and then go up the second flight of stairs to the left. So they'll taunt the Barbarian as it's coming down the stairs. You can even move into the next room to make sure that you're plenty far away from everybody else, and then have one healer go with that tank because it's kind of going to be hard for them to stay alive by themselves, and they just help keep that tank alive. Everybody else goes into the main room, and you guys focus down the Butcher, and once the Butcher is dead, then kill the Reaver, and then once that's dead, everybody can kind of head up the stairs and work on the other 2 ads. The main thing, though, is just to kill the Butcher as fast as possible. The Butcher will stomp the ground and cause a very large dot on everybody in that area, and that dot scales off your max health, so it's even harder on the tanks than it is on everybody else. So you need a lot of heals during that point. So you just got to heal through it and then kill the Butcher as quickly as possible. I would also note that before this last pull, You can get ulti on the pull before this. It's a really easy pull. Just make sure everybody has ults. And then before you start this pull, make sure everybody has Destro ults. And that way you just run up. Even if you're a Warden, you still slot a Destro ult. Run up, drop your Destro ults, and that Butcher will die pretty quickly. All right, now moving on to the second boss. Now this is kind of a long fight, so I'm going to move through it in the order that you would experience it. So I'm going to start off with just kind of the overview of what everybody should do, where they should stand, and then I'll kind of move through the fight. So to start off, let's go ahead and talk about positioning. Now I know that there are quite a few ways to do this, and they're all valid. They all actually work. And so if you have a way you like to do this fight, feel free to do it that way. What I'm going to tell you today is what I think is the simplest and easy way to get a new group through this fight. And just to give you my experience, I run a trials guild where we focus on getting people into veteran trials. So we run a lot of trials with new people. And so I've had a fair amount of experience with this. So when you first come in, you enter the arena over to your left, that corner. That's where you actually want to start with the main boss. So you'll taunt him and you'll pull him into that main corner. And then what you're going to do when the ads start spawning is you're going to have the off tank grab them and they're going to move to the entrance door. And then whenever they go to drop the ground AoE, you're going to dodge roll to your left. So the DPS is right towards the main tank. And then you're just going to turn around, hold the ad inside of the circle if you can. And the reason for that is you're trying to move them as little as possible so that it stays within the ground dots and all your DPS don't have to reapply their ground dots because you want this ad to die as quickly as possible. And then every time an ad comes up, you're going to stack it right beside the previous AoE, persistent ground AoE that is on the ground, and dodge roll left every time. Now, as a main tank, every time an ad comes up after the first one, you're going to scoot to your left about 8 meters. So you actually have to start moving around the square kind of immediately there, but you're just going to move the boss a little bit. And the reason for that is that every time an ad comes up, you want to stop DPS on the boss. One of the easiest way to do that is to move the boss out of the ground AoEs that are already on the ground. And so if you just move them just a little bit, not too much, outside of those AoEs, it'll stop a lot of the DPS on them and hopefully keep you from accidentally pushing and having a second ad come up. Especially if you're in pugs or if you have a couple people that aren't in comms, that can be a problem. And the goal with the positioning of the two tanks is that they are close together, but not too close. So you want them close together so that the group healer can easily reach and heal both of them. And then you want them far enough apart so that when the main tank's curses go off and when he explodes and he sends out curses, it's not too close to the DPS or the off tank so that they have problems dodging or getting out of the way. So that's the rationale there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have a kite healer and a kite DPS, basically in the center, more or less in the center of the arena. And their job, their main and kind of only job is to make sure that they are constantly getting cursed and that nobody else is. So you want to be the furthest people from the boss. There's no maximum range like there was with the first boss, Oaks, when he charges. There's no 28 meters. So anywhere in the arena, if you're the furthest 2 people away, you will get the curses. And what will happen is a Lich Crystal will spawn and it'll be a ground AoE. You need to roll out of that very quickly because it'll explode and that'll kill you. And then after that, you just need to stay alive. There are a couple of other things that you guys can do, but we're going to talk about that in a second. So again, we basically got a triangle between the two tanks and the kite healer / DPS. And the idea is that the kite healer and kite DPS are always the furthest from the main boss. So they stay more or less in the center of the arena the whole time, but exactly where they stand will vary depending on what's going on. And typically your kite healer in this situation is going to be your spell power cure healer so that they can still hit the group, get the spell power cure buff on the group easily, and then don't really need to worry about doing much else as far as group buffs and utility go. All right, for the DPS, you guys are simply going to stand behind the boss. Now, one thing I see happen a lot, and it shouldn't, is that DPS will get really close to the boss. You always want to DPS from maximum melee range or a little bit further. So that's 5 meters. So if you're a melee DPS, I highly recommend you get used to DPSing for maximum melee range. And the reason for that is when the curses go off on the main tank, sometimes they head straight for the group. And if you're right up on the boss, you're going to get hit before you can react. And then when you blow up, you're going to kill a bunch of people that are behind you and it can cause group wipes. So again, try to stay back as far as you can. All right, so you go ahead and pull the boss, you put him in the corner. Now you DPS him down, and at 90%, the first ad is going to spawn. It'll spawn from one of the Oblivion symbols you see around the arena, and then that symbol will not be used again. So that can be helpful for figuring out where the ads are likely to spawn towards the end of the fight, or at least towards 50% of boss's health. So a new ad will spawn every 5% health from 90 to 60. So 90%, 85, 80, 75, all the way down to 60, the last Atros spawns. And again, every time they spawn, your off tank is going to go range taunt them, pull them back to the edge near one of the other AoEs. The ad, as soon as it comes up to you, the first thing it's going to do is heavy attack you. And when it heavy attacks, that's what causes the persistent ground AoE. Now, you can be standing inside that ring whenever he goes to heavy attack. And as long as when he brings his fist down, you're dodge rolling, or outside of that circle, you're not really going to take any damage from it. So you move to the left just as far as you have to. Turn back. You could even leave the ad inside of his own ground AoE. That's not a bad thing. It means that he hasn't moved very far, and hopefully he's still in most of the ground dots. Now, as a DPS, you're going to make sure that you kind of angle all your ground dots a little bit to the right so that when he does need to move a little bit, whenever the tank dodge rolls, you don't have to reapply those ground dots. Now, throughout this entire fight, you want to make sure that you're saving ultimates, and every time an ad comes up, ideally you will have at least one ultimate you can drop on it. So Horn, Colossus, whatever, every time an ad comes up, try to drop one on it as soon as it gets in position. And again, DPS it down as quickly as possible. If you leave the Flesh Atros up for too long, they will heavy attack again and cause another persistent ground AoE. Those don't go away throughout the entire fight. So having one or two extra is not that big of a deal, but if every single one of them is dropping a second ground AoE, you're quickly going to run out of room. Also, if you get a ground AoE that somehow accidentally gets dropped right in the center of the arena, that makes things a lot harder. So if you're with a new group, I recommend just go ahead and wiping, clearing it, and then trying again. Now, for the main tank during this phase, your main job is just to stay alive. So you want to have a front bar that is a damage mitigation bar. You could put Flare on there now. TC Lee from the Tank Club has done good videos. You can go watch those. Having Master Sword and Board will help you. Having Vigor as well as a class heal will help. And that's pretty much it. Just try to get resources back whenever you are not cursed. And then when you are cursed, just try to hold block, take as little damage possible, and then heal yourself as much as possible. Now, for the group healer. One thing I would highly recommend is you put radiating regeneration on your bar and then you keep it up on as many people as possible throughout this entire fight. And for the main tank, I would recommend that you always have at least 2 heal over times on the main tank throughout the entire fight. So having radiating regeneration can work really well, and then you could throw a ground hot or something else their way. Make sure that whenever they move the boss, when the ad is coming up, you place the heal in the proper location so that they're inside of it. You can also tell them like, hey, this is the heal I'm using. This is what it looks like. Make sure you stand inside of it. If it's in a bad position, they can, hey, can you move it like it's not in a good spot or whatever. Just communicate with your main tank so that you can keep 2 heal over times on them at all times. Now, for the off tank, whenever the ads are up, basically what you can do is just combat prayer, and combat prayer goes long enough that you can hit all of the DPS and the off tank and keep them alive by just using combat prayer. Now, if things are going well, you got extra time, throw another heal over time on your main tank, throw another heal over time on your off tank, and that'll just help people from, dying if things go a little bit wrong. For DPS during this fight, your main job is to just not get cursed. If you run into one of the curses or if they run into you, what happens is it explodes and it kills everybody around you, but it leaves you alive and curses you. So if you ever find yourself cursed in the middle of a bunch of dead bodies, you probably just killed all your friends. So if that happens to you, you want to move back to where the group healer is at, and they'll have ground heals on the ground. You can have them show you what it looks like before the fight. Move back to the kite healer and stand inside their hots, and they will keep you alive while you're cursed. Once you're cursed, also spamming shield is very helpful. You should have a shield for this fight. Once that goes off, then you can move back in a group and rinse and repeat. Now, if you're the kite healer or the kite DPS, again, your job is to make sure you get those curses. If you're the DPS, it's a good practice to go ahead and DPS down the archers that are around. The off tank can also help chain those in when there's not an ad up, but in general, they're going to be spread out, and so you can just DPS them down as you're standing in the middle of the arena. When you get cursed, feel free to just make sure you spam your curse and stay alive. And then the other thing is you can stand close to the healer back there, because if 2 people get cursed at the same time and then blow up at the same time, you're immune for like a second after that curse blows up. So you can be standing right next to each other, have your curses blow up, and you won't curse each other. Now, if someone is out of sync with you by a couple of seconds, you can recurse someone even if they're already cursed, and so you want to be careful with that. But basically just stand in the middle, stand in the back, and then keep heals on the ground. I often recommend and ask my kite healer to go ahead and drop heals so that everybody in the group before the fight, so that everybody in the group can see what they look like. If you're using Bogdan, so you've got a Bogdan totem, on the ground or stuff like that, go ahead and drop all that so that all your DPS know what it looks like, and that way they can move back and they know what your heals look like. You would think that basically everybody knows what these heals look like, but you would actually be surprised. Now, you've DPS'd the boss to 60%. Now, you have two places at this point where you can put the boss. So the first one is directly opposite the entrance door, and I would recommend doing it there unless you've just got too many of the Flesh Atro AoEs that have gone down, in which case you could move to the second position here, which is kind of in between the entrance door and the portal, but along the lava. So just bring them to the side there. The whole goal here is that you create the same distance between the main tank and the off tank whenever the ads come up. So at 50% and every 10% after that, you're going to get a fire behemoth that's going to spawn out of the Oblivion portal, and the off tank can just simply taunt it and leave it wherever it's at. And then all the DPS turns, DPSs it down, and then goes back to the boss. So again, you're trying to keep that same distance you did with the Atros with the fire behemoth and the main boss. And that's the reason for the main tank positioning after 50%. Now, Kite Healer and DPS, you guys are going to be doing the exact same thing during this portion of the fight. You can also DPS down ghosts if you're the Kite DPS, so that you don't get too many of them because they can cause some problems. And then the other thing that's going to happen is at 35% health, 35 or 25, I'm sorry, I'm second guessing myself, meteors are going to start spawning. And you'll see that it tells you where it's going to spawn because it'll create a hollow circle on the ground, like a ground AoE, and the sun will spawn in the middle of that. So it lets you know a few seconds before it's going to spawn in where it's going to spawn. The raid lead just needs to call out where the location is, and then everybody, as soon as the sun spawns, it's a party wipe mechanic if you don't kill it within like 8 seconds. So everybody in the group needs to turn and DPS it. Now, if everybody does that and most of the group is alive, it's going to die really quickly. So you only need to use your spambles on it. You don't need to do a full rotation. You don't need to dot it up. It dies in a few seconds. So just hit it with your spammable and then go right back to the boss. Now, if it is at the opposite side of the arena or very far from the boss, everybody just needs to move into maximum range distance, DPS it from there, and then move back. The reason is you don't want to get too far from the boss so that other people get curses. You also don't want to get too spread out because then the healers can't heal you, and that becomes a problem and people can die. Also, if you get too close to the sun, you will take damage from it. So all those are reasons. If you've only got 2 or 3 melee DPS in your group, they can actually stay on the boss or the ad, whichever you're DPSing, and just have the rest of the DPS that are ranged kill the sun. Now, if half your group's dead or something like that, you do need everybody to be on the sun because you don't want it to blow up and wipe the group. But again, if you have 4 or 5 ranged DPS, they can just hit it with their spambles, and that should be more than enough damage to kill it before it blows up. And that's really it for this fight. Simply rinse and repeat. Now, one thing I will say that I've also seen happen as I did on the first boss is that sometimes people will not DPS down the last ad, and that can cause party wipes. And it does so often that just DPS down the ads, just rinse and repeat, because sometimes, you've got an ad up and you're thinking, oh, we're just going to push the boss, and then a sun spawns, but it spawns at the back corner. And so now you've got to run, DPS down the sun, and then come back and try to kill the boss. But during that time, the off tank died or something. And so then the ad's loose and it just kills everybody, and you die with the boss at like 3% health. I've seen it happen so many times that, again, I just recommend rinse and repeat, do the same thing every time, kill the ads every time they come up, and then kill the boss until you get a bit more experience. All right, so the ads after the first boss can all be skipped. And if you do decide to kill them, they honestly are not too bad. They are all mechanics that you've seen before at this point. The Sun Eaters cause suns to spawn, as you might imagine, and they need to be DPS down just like they did with the second boss, but everything else is the same. Now, moving on to the Ash Titan. So the Ash Titan is kind of a mini boss that you have to fight, and he has 2 ads with him in this fight. He has a Sun Eater on the left, and then he has a Barbarian on the right. Now, the Barbarian does the teleport strike thing that we saw earlier in the fight before the second boss, and then the Sun Eater create suns that need to be DPS down before moving back to him. So what I would recommend, if you're new to this, everybody runs up to the left to the Sun Eater and DPSs it down, and the goal is to kill it as quickly as possible. Now, it's still going to summon a sun, and you do need to stop DPS on it, kill the sun, and then go back to it. And then your goal with the first pull is just to kill the Sun Eater. Now, the off tank is going to taunt the Barbarian and then run towards the Sun Eater, because the Sun Eater is a ranged ad, taunt the Sun Eater, and then just turn them around from group. And then the main tank is just going to grab the Ash Titan, turn it around, and just hold it there. Now, if you're new or if you have low DPS, the easiest thing to do is to just try to kill each one of the ads. Work on the Sun Eater, kill it. If you wipe, that's fine. Then the next ad pull, you kill the Barbarian, and then the next ad pull, then you wipe, and then the next ad pull, you go for the Ash Titan. That's totally fine. If you want to do it the speed strat way, you just stack everything and burn it, just like you would with all the other ads. And if you want to do that, you need to range stack the Sun Eater and then have the main tank or off tank grab the Barbarian and then bring it into group as soon as you can. So if you have the main tank grab it for a second, it can be in the group and getting cleaved down. while the off tank range stacks the Sun Eater. Now, after it's been up for a second, the Ash Titan will start a meteor phase. And what I would recommend before you do this pull is that everybody arranges in a semicircle around the main tank, just like you would for lanes in Veteran Asylum Sanctorum. And that way, you know, you're kind of your kite lanes, because what happens is two kind of meteors spawn. One are ground AoEs that are stationary on the ground, and those are a little bit larger. And those you absolutely have to get out of. You don't want to get hit by those. If you do, they will kill you, they'll one-shot you, and there's really nothing you can do. Now, the other kind of AoE will be centered on people, individuals, and so it'll move around with you. Those can be blocked. You can use a shield. There are several abilities that can also be useful, and you could also use Gossamer. Anyways, what you want to do with that is just shield, block, and dodge roll. Those three things, some combination of them, and you can actually stay alive without too much trouble. The other thing that people I don't think know is that the further you are from the Ash Titan, the more damage he does. So you want to kite, but you want to stay kind of close. So you back up in your lane, then kind of go left or right, and then come back forward. And that's how you deal with the Ash Titan. And then it's kind of live, die, repeat. You can res 2 people in between meteor phases. So if you're alive and some of your friends are dead, you can get off 2 reses in between a meteor phase. Now moving on to Xalvakka. Xalvakka is actually, once you've got through everything else in this trial, Xalvakka is actually not too hard. What you're going to do is just turn around where she's at. She will do a heavy attack, which has like 5 parts to it. It's like a swipe, long pause, 1, 2, kind of a short pause, 3, long pause, and then the fifth attack. So the timing on that is really weird. It's just a channeled heavy attack like the warrior, except for it just kind of has a weird timing to it. Now, as a main tank, your goal is to dodge 2 of those attacks. And if you can dodge 2 of them, maybe even 3, then you're going to be good. You can eat the rest as far as just holding block. If you just hold block through all of them, you're going to be needing a lot of heals, both by yourself and from your healers. So just keep that in mind. Try to dodge a couple of those attacks. Once you get the timing down, it's not too bad. Now for the off tank, a bunch of ads are going to be spawning, so you'll get everything under the sun. So there'll be the little beholder guys will spawn. You'll get some fire atros. You'll get other ads, and they'll all spawn. What I would recommend is stacking them just behind the main tank. And the reason for that is because the cleave will be going through the main tank and will hit those guys there. And then if the fire atro is the main one you have to worry about, he will create a ground AoE centered on him. And it's a decent size, kind of a medium size AoE, but the main tank can just move to his left or right, turn the boss to the side, and it's not really a problem for him. And by placing him there, you'll make sure that they're getting cleaved down pretty quickly. The other thing that will spawn too is a Daedroth. Now the Daedroths in here, they have a conal attack that they do, the fire breath. Man, it hits really hard in here. So you will really want to make sure that you keep that turned away from the group and that you pick it up as soon as it spawns. Now you'll notice that ghosts spawn in from the outside and move towards Xalvakka. If they get to her, they will give her a shield and it does empower her. If too many get to her, she's going to start one-shotting people, and you're also not going to be able to DPS down the shield. This is honestly just a DPS check. I've really only seen it when this fight first came out, and when we brought in a bunch of level 10 guys and did this on normal. Our DPS was a little low, and so it was hard to get those ghosts killed, and we didn't have a lot of AoE damage, so it's hard to kill the ghosts. If that happens to you, you can single target down the ghosts. However, if you get too many of them, it just means that your DPS is too low. You could try to have people change to kind of more of an AoE setup or something like that. But again, if you're still having problems, it probably just means that the group's DPS is a little low. Typically, you should have like 60k. At least the 60k parse in here, but honestly, something like 70k will make it a lot easier. All right, now the other thing that happens here is something called Soul Purge. So you'll see it pop up as a synergy, and Soul Purge comes from the ghosts, and you'll see these boogers on the ground. That's the Soul Purge. So you don't want to drop that in group because it does slow you and it does put a dot on you. So if you see the Soul Purge synergy pop up, what you want to do is dodge roll out of group, away from the exit door, then use the synergy, and then move it back in a group. And that's all that has to be done. Now at 70%, she's going to start taking off and moving to the next floor. And as soon as that happens, or as soon as you've pushed her past 70%, even if she's in some other mechanic, you guys need to start moving towards the exit door. And you can even get everybody stacked up there before she's gone through. And she'll run across the bridge, and then run up the stairwell. And then you'll be allowed to run across the bridge yourselves. You need to run as quickly as possible. If you have someone who can put on rapids, like an off tank or something, or if you have a Nightblading group, make sure they're dropping using their Path of Darkness, so that will give a speed buff, and everybody just sprints across the bridge as quickly as possible. Now, once you're across the bridge, you're kind of home free. You can take your time going up the stairs, and I would recommend that. What I would do is have one healer follow behind at the very back, and if anybody takes too much damage from the various fire jets or whatever that pop out, wait for that healer, they'll heal you up, and then you guys all move up the tower together. Once you get to the top, you can all stack up, don't run out, stack up, wait for everybody to get there. There's no time limit, and then you can all run out together so that hopefully, you have healers and everybody else there and nobody dies needlessly. Now, if you had anybody who was dead on the first floor, you don't want to be rezzing them whenever it's time to move to the second floor. So hopefully you left them if that was the case, because usually that just leads to you dying most often. So their bodies will spawn on the second floor. You can have a couple people stop and res them. Just make sure you have one healer at least. Drop some ground hots there because they will be taking AoE damage while they're trying to get those reses. The second floor is basically rinse and repeat. The only thing new that will happen is that the entire floor will turn into fire at some point, and Xalvakka will split into 3 images. When this happens, you want to have everybody group in the very center, and the reason for that is because there's going to be a bunch of damage going on, and all the healers will drop their heals in the very center of the arena, and that will keep everybody alive. So healers, drop all your heals in the very center of the arena, all the DPS group up in the center, and now your 2 tanks, whenever this fire phase happens, you both pick a different version of Xalvakka, move to it. If it turns translucent and you can see through it, it's just a fake, you can call that out. If it doesn't turn translucent, that you have the real Xalvakka and say, hey, it's on me, and you start jumping. If both the tanks call out that theirs is a fake, it's the third one. And so once you get used to it, you can do that in like 1 or 2 seconds, and you don't even need add-ons for it. So just keep that in mind. All the group DPS and healers stack in the center during that phase. The tanks check out and figure out which one of the Xalvakkas needs to be DPS, and then everybody can cheat towards that Xalvakka, and the healers will be at the back of the group and can combat prayer everybody and keep everybody alive, even if they're a little bit more spread out. But again, just stack up. Now, once you DPS down that Xalvakka, there is a window that you have to do that in, but it shouldn't be a problem. She goes back to the same thing. She heavy attacks, adds spawn in. It's just rinse and repeat. Now, running up to the third floor, you do the exact same thing. That happens at 40%. So when she gets near 40%, you need to be ready to run. Everybody runs up the stairs, waits at the top of the tower, and then you go out. Now, on the third floor, it's really the same. The only difference is that the center of the arena is gone, and you can fall in there. So you do need to be careful. The other thing that is new is that she'll cause kind of meteors. They're not meteors, but she'll cause ground AoEs to spawn. They're called like Death Stars or something. I forget what they're called. But they'll cause these ground AoEs to spawn. You do need to move or dodge roll out of those. If you get hit by too many of them, they will kill you. So you need a lot of heals going on, and then DPS and tanks even. Just DPS shuffle, dodge roll as much as you need to. The rule of thumb is you don't want to get hit by more than one of them within a short period of time, because they do a lot of damage, and if you get hit by 2, it'll usually kill you. After that phase is over, again, just go back to DPSing. Ads will continue to spawn. The off tank needs to grab them. I would say the biggest problem up here with the ads is the Daedros, because they're conal attacks. Since you have a limited area where everybody can stand, it can hit a lot of people in group, and if it does, and then the Death Stars, the AoEs are going off at the same time, it can kill people, and a lot of people can die. So make sure you grab taunt on the ads as soon as they come up, stack them behind the tank, and have the group AoE them down. Now, if your DPS is low throughout this entire fight, what I would recommend is that you single target all the ads and just go ahead and kill them. You'll still be able to get plenty of DPS on Xalvakka, still be able to push her to the next phases. The fights will last a little bit longer, but trust me, it'll be a lot easier, and particularly with the larger ads. Now, the new ad that will spawn on this floor, and it might spawn on the other floors if you take long enough, is a Goliath, and it's a humanoid ad. What he does is kind of the inverse of what the Iron Atros do. So the Iron Atros create an AoE right around, centered on themselves. The Goliath actually creates a ring, kind of like a donut, where the center is safe and outside of that ring is safe, but the ring itself is fire. So there's 2 ways to handle this guy. One is to just bring him way out of group, and that way his ring doesn't affect anybody, and that's probably the safest way as an off tank. Just pull him out of group and just hold him really far out. The other way to do it is to stack him right on top of the DPS, and that way whenever he does his ring, the DPS is inside of it, the tank can move inside of it, and everybody can still DPS everything down. Now, the problem with that is that if you have multiple ads up at the same time, so you have an Iron Atro, you basically end up with no place safe to stand. So again, if you have a lot of ads, just focus them down if DPS is low. And same for keeping them outside of group. Some groups will do that. They'll have the off tank stand outside of group, but if the off tank gets too many ads, they're going to run out of resources eventually, and then they're going to die. So, if you get too many ads, you're not DPSing fast enough, you do need to turn and focus them. And that's it, guys. That is Rockgrove as quick as I can do it. So if you like this video, you thought it was helpful, please share it with others so that they can see it themselves. And if you're looking for something more in depth, again, I have the ultimate guide on the channel. And with that, that's it for today. So thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.